This is part 2 of our study of the subject of embedded versus disembedded educational interventions. And we're going to move on from where we were before. There are several. Let's see what we got going on here. Okay, reading from the script. Parents of children who exhibit rapid language development actively work to maintain shared understanding over long stretches of interaction. This just simply means that language development, as it was mentioned in the other video, is a comprehension-driven, not just memorizing syntactics. And so one of the procedures that I was taught many years ago, which I used with my own children, was that when they ask a question about the meaning of something, usually they were expecting a fairly simple answer. But very often, the word they were interested in, or the thing, was susceptible to being expanded, talked about widely on their level, not talking about stuff above their thinking capacity, but just things out of the world that help that word take on greater meaning. And that, of course, would maintain your interaction for a long time very productively. It says they do this in several ways. They introduce objects to serve as basis for joint activities. So there's a clue, because remember we had said before that joint activities where the person is learning and reinventing their own way are one of the main purposes for guided reinventions in the first place. They introduce objects to serve as basis for joint activities. They closely monitor their child's apparent goals or intentions. And that means more than that. You need to be able to assess their level of mental development, what skills and tools have emerged, and which ones you can help them with, perhaps in this intervention or interaction. But this is also where it comes in, where it's so important, apparently, that children write or draw pictures, do things that help you to decide where they are, not just their knowledge base intellectually, but their ability to use language in their thinking skills processes. Fisher, in his Harvard school, when they conduct their work, they get the children to keep notebooks. And he says, and remember that his presentation is online and you can find it. And it's called the Summer Institute presentation. I'll try to put it into a thumbnail for this. But anyway, he says that they use the children's notebooks to monitor their development. And you understand that if this is widely used, it's a really clever way to use dyadic instruction, like in a larger family where you have a bunch of children. And group instruction is not where you want to be, although you can use it. But having the children do things, giving you pictures based on their understanding, working with them one-on-one, getting them to write for you, and so on, will give you the tools you need to be able to assess their goals, their intentions, and their abilities Quoting again, during most of their interactive terms, they attempt to modulate, correct, or elaborate their child's behavior rather than redirect it. So this is speaking of the children, the parents, meaning. During their interactive terms, meaning you don't dominate everything. When you have a turn, they attempt to modulate, correct, or elaborate their child's behavior rather than redirect it. Instead of just thumped them on the head and saying, no, you're so on. We do that without any physical actions, just by our words, tone of voice, other things. So you need to ponder on modulate, correct, and this idea of elaborate, where I was telling you that giving them expanded information as part of a question's answer can give them extra material to use. And it says the parents again, they construct an internal model of their child's current preferences, skills, and world knowledge, which they continually update and check. And so that's where the writing comes in. Certainly you can do it verbally, but if you have very many people to deal with, you might find it difficult to be as explicit and careful as you need to be to create truly powerful interventions. Now let's just deal with formal schooling versus embedded instruction. Because you have to be careful in your teaching that you're not using formal schooling, but that you're using the embedded instruction procedures. You need to make a great effort to understand the differences between embedded and disembedded teaching. And that word is spelled E-M-B-E-D-D-E-D, embedded. Preparing and teaching lessons in the traditional way done in school has its place, but embedded teaching liberates real power in your guided reinventions. So you just really need to keep this in mind when you're doing your preparations for your interventions. Embedded teaching is unlike that found in most formal schooling. Under normal conditions, it seems that every child receives a steady diet of what might be called embedded teachings, elaborative, corrective acts responsibly embedded by parents in the flow of joint, goal-directed activity. So what they're saying here is that the elaborative and corrective acts are embedded in your interaction when you're administering an intervention and you have a goal and a goal-directed activity. As the child spontaneously and vigorously works to master a wide range of goals, his or her constructive efforts are constantly guided by the parent's embedded teaching efforts. You ever been around a kid that keeps saying, why, why, how come? They want to know. They're just ripe for this embedded instruction. And if you take the time to answer the question correctly and fully, they absorb it and they make it part of their own. And you have a great power of input and facts and ideas through that effort. Although such efforts do not obviate the need for inventive and inductive efforts by the child, they appear to be crucial if the child's efforts are to result in a course of development that is recognizably normal. In other words, the development of a fully articulated human mind is a joint venture activity between the learner and the environment. and you as the interventionist are the environment. And if you withhold that interaction, like maybe, I don't know, sticking a control in her hand or a video of something or other and putting on an educational video for them, yes, that may be good, but it lacks the power to knowingly, deliberately, insightfully help them to develop their thinking capacity and their database of what to think about. So you need to be there. Okay, now this is Wood, 1980. When instructional techniques depart from the embedded teaching mode, the child's progress is markedly slowed. For many children, the classroom setting is not a good place for them to learn. And when you let life slip past them, and so the techniques you're using are classroom instruction techniques or giving them all the answers or anything that departs from the things we're talking about, their progress is markedly slowed. This ties into Fisher's ideas of optimal and formal performance. Fisher says that when you're thinking, you have an optimal state of mind where all that you know and all your skills come online and you do your very best work. Formal is what happens when you're just left to yourself. They're saying that the optimal function of the human mind only works when it's being scaffolded by an intelligent other. I wish I could reach out of the screen and tell you how important that is. When scaffolded, a person can function at their best level of cognitive thinking development. Without that support, we all sink quickly back to doing the best we can with our own resources, our formal level. Just as an indication of how important this idea is, God ordained a mentor for you to be a constant companion with you all the time to scaffold your mind to help you do the best that you are capable of. And that's the Holy Ghost. And our prophet has said recently that we will not be able to survive spiritually in the future without the Holy Ghost. So this is an item that's very much worth contemplating as you think about your own growth as an interventionist or on any other level. Think about the capacity the Holy Ghost has to scaffold your mind and help you do this. And think about what happens when a person turns and walks away from the church who does not believe and does not call upon God. Is it any wonder that their minds slip? And then, unfortunately, too often, our common enemy steps in and starts to fill that void with nonsense and things that do not lead them to a good conclusion. But you should ask yourself, or I suggest you ask yourself, how about you? Are you using knowingly, deliberately, explicitly the scaffolding, revelation, sanctification, sustaining influence of the Holy Ghost in your life? And as you think about this, and you're doing your interventions, think about you playing that role, that you're that type of person. We've been told what influence can be maintained and how. And so all of this stuff begins to tie together. Through non-local integration, you can go out and find all of this stuff in its little discrete compartments, and begin putting it together in just a very powerful way. Your aha moment, your guided reinvention can lead you to higher levels than you ever imagined. Okay, let's see how I'm doing for time here. All right. Embedded teaching and formal schooling. This type of interaction, embedded teaching, is called dyadic, meaning one-to-one. It does not lend itself to classroom instruction in a formal school setting. Formal classroom instruction is an important cultural tool used by societies to transfer information from one source to another, the teacher to the learner. It has its own structure and practices, and academic success in life generally follows ability in classroom settings and can be measured in IQ scores. But IQ does not correlate with success in life, as Sternberg, Fisher, Feuerstein, and others will show us. This is, as we will see elsewhere, where IQ scores are a reliable indication of academic success. We won't get into this now. Sternberg will help us understand it much better. The point is, this dyadic style of learning is powerful, and most children have learned to take instruction this way. Further, for our purposes, nurturing the millennial mind, it is a method of choice. It is the method of choice. But like so much of what we're covering, it's not a matter of right and wrong, one way or the other. Rather, it's seeking a much broader and more eternal viewpoint that blends both. Our celestial toolkit for guided interventions. Right now, we are losing children from the school system, from the church in far too large numbers. What I'm attempting here is to equip a person, one at a time, to engage in helping another person, one at a time, gain use of thinking, cognitive development capacity, and tools for thinking, and access to important things to think about. Formal schooling techniques and practices and philosophy are highly elaborated and widely available to you. Now that's the material that I've chosen out of the study guide to introduce you to. But it's there much more deeply and much better. It goes on for pages. Much to be learned, and if you're not understanding this very well, if you'll just dig into the study guide and begin to outline it and use non-local integration, pick up ideas here and there and so on, I promise you you'll develop, or at least be exposed to, a huge architecture or structure of how the human mind works, of how the gospel works, how Jesus teaches, and many, many other things. So I encourage you to do that. Thank you for spending time with me today.